Hello and welcome to The Factory Must Grow, a new in-development Factorio overhaul mod which has utterly fascinated me over the last week, where you play as an AI with only one directive: the factory must grow. With it being very early in development, it's got some rough edges and it's not particularly long yet, but it's interesting enough even in its current state that I thought it deserved a video. As you can see, we've started out here on a space platform, and I've immediately been distracted by some shiny asteroids flying around. With any new overhaul, it's always a good idea to look in the tech tree first thing, where I find this trigger tech to build a matter reconstructor. Interesting. Upon placing it down, check parameters of program self 1.0.0. Beep boop beep 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 boop boop boop. One parameter found. The factory must grow. Pardon me. As I was saying, upon placing it down, I get the recipe for general purpose structure, which requires 10 ferric asteroid chunks to make 32. These machines need power, and thankfully I have this handy proton decay thermoelectric generator, which puts out 1 gigawatt of power for free. Given that it is an early development mod, I can only assume this is some sort of balanced stopgap before a proper early power solution is developed later. I'm not going to look a gift horse in the mouth, however. You can see at the bottom here a heating window. We'll come back to this in a moment. Crafting a load of general purpose structure unlocked furnaces, which I need conductive wire and circuits to craft. Thankfully both of these can be crafted in the matter reconstructor. Wire from ferric chunks and circuits by combining ferric chunks and crystalline chunks. These are the only two types of asteroid currently in the mod, even though the vanilla ones still show up in the menus. Anyway, with a furnace I can now smelt ferric chunks into 1 ferric plate each, 2 of which can be crafted into 1 general purpose structure. So instead of 3.2 structure from 1 chunk with a matter reconstructor, we now get 0.5. I'm minding my own business when I get hit with a big old wall of yap. To summarise, any buildings we build in space produce heat, which we need to vent off into space or else they'll stop working and eventually start taking damage. We can see here this furnace is quite close to overheating. To vent the heat, we need to place these radiators on the edge of the platform and use heat pipes to transfer the heat from the furnaces to the radiators. These mechanical components are used in a lot of machines, so I start my matter reconstructor to produce some directly from ferric chunks. To hook back onto a previous thought, this matter reconstructor is pretty OP, but since we only get 1 of them and are unable to craft any more, we'll eventually be forced to use the worst recipes in normal buildings anyway. Next up, we want mineral glass, which we get from smelting crystalline chunks in a furnace. And hang on a minute, this isn't mineral glass. As it turns out, it only produces mineral glass when in an atmosphere, and whilst in space we actually get a hot mineral plate, which cools over a minute into crystalline plates. That's a pretty interesting use of space age's spoilage mechanics, and to get the mineral glass we actually want whilst it's in space, we have to cool it quickly in an assembly machine when it's still hot. One of the convenient things about starting on a space platform, and there aren't many, is that we can pull ingredients out of the hub to craft anything we want instead of having to do any belt routing. The crystalline plates are actually useful for making AI chips, which we need for making the supercomputer interface. After moving the proton decay generator up here, I placed down an assembler to craft our first science pack, the introspection data card, by combining crystalline plates, mechanical components and modular circuits. That's not the pack done though, as they start off unverified, and to verify them we need to pass them into the supercomputer interface, which requires us to continuously solve mathematical problems it spits out to function. With it being the first science pack, it's not a particularly difficult problem. It basically gives us 2 numbers, A and B, and an operator, and we just have to do A operator B. So it might be A plus B, or A divided by B, or A times B. And whatever the answer is, we just pass it into the combinator on the right and the machine makes a tick worth of progress, about 20% of validation for one pack. My solution is as simple as 4 arithmetic combinators for each operator, which calculate each possibility, and then a decider combinator on each that only lets the answer through if the operator matches. It almost immediately stopped working, which confused me before I realised that I'd put the slash signal in the decider for division instead of the actual division signal. I can then pass the verified card into this neural node to then actually research things, starting with ore crushing, which I don't actually use for quite a while. I built this little circuit thing for the matter reconstructor next, which automatically changes its recipe to whatever resource we don't have much of, so I can take advantage of its way better recipes for my little mall thing I have going on here. You can tell I've got a bit too comfortable because I'm now trying to figure out what happens when buildings overheat instead of doing something productive. Due to heating shenanigans, the heat spikes in the supercomputer when I place this furnace next to it, which does a bit of damage. Interesting. Machines shut off way before their overheat threshold, so I need to place this furnace to continue heating them after they've turned off. The supercomputer reaches its overheat threshold first and it begins taking damage. If it was something a bit less expensive, I'd have let it hit the bottom just to see what happened. But alas, my curiosity is satisfied and we can get back to actually doing something. I head over to the Void next to start designing some actual production and come out with this, which harvests asteroid chunks from space, splits them and smelts them separately. I decide to attach it over here on the bottom left so I can expand a bus out along to the right. After it's built and I've connected some heating, or well I suppose cooling, I realised that there's no point in smelting the crystalline chunks up here, because if we want mineral glass it'll have spoiled by the time it gets to an assembler, so instead I put the crystalline chunks onto the bus. The first item I set up off the bus is circuits. The mineral glass for which I'm utilising circuit conditions to turn off the furnaces if the mineral glass assembler has enough hot mineral plate to avoid it spoiling into crystalline plate. We combine mineral glass with ferric plate and conductive wire, itself just made of ferric plate, to make the circuits, which ends up with this nice little inserter mess to insert it all. To make mechanical components, we turn ferric plate into general purpose structure, and then combine that with more ferric plate. Ignore my stupid ass adding the structure onto the belt with the components. The worst thing about not having a body is not being able to hoover off the belt shit you accidentally dumped on there. For crystalline plates, we obviously pass the chunks through a furnace, but I then have these containers whose input inserters will take in anything, but output inserters only take crystalline plates, so they're effectively a space for the plates to cool. Containers are weird, not just because they can be placed on space platforms, but because they only have one slot, but that one slot holds 5 stacks. With all the ingredients for introspection cards producing, I can move it over here to get some proper research going. It's not long then before I've researched the Scoutotron, a means for me to have a physical presence somewhere other than this space platform, which I suppose as a semi-sentient AI is essentially my body. It is called Self, after all. I begin crafting the drop pod for the Scout, and as soon as it finishes I...
Resources equals ferric asteroid chunk, crystalline asteroid chunk, calculating viable production trees. Error. Hydrocarbons, oxygen, water, not found. Error. Required energy supply not found. Attempting to resolve production trees with alternative materials. 0 suitable substitutions found. Subroutine expansion. Requesting resources. Subroutine exploitation. Failed. Subroutine extermination. Sleeping. Subroutine exploration. Sleeping. Wake exploration subroutine. Subroutine exploration initializing. Directive. Require arrival.
You heard the computer. I deploy the Scout drop pod, which immediately discovers the planet of arrival, and drops our little Scoutotron down to its barren surface. He's a funny looking fella, with only 3 legs and looking probably a bit smaller than the vanilla Spidertron. My first task for him is to head outwards in a spiral so we can get a better look at this place. Bots are available straight away in this mod, only needing the first science pack, so I start producing some logistic and construction bots, as well as robo parts to truly begin my colonisation of the planet below. I start a little solar farm planet side, and the first tier of electric poles I get are these little pylons which have a tiny 5x5 coverage area and have to be manually connected together with the wire tool. Immediately I come to find an issue. How do I put robots into a robo part without logistic bots to move them and nobody to do it manually? Obviously, anyone with more than 8 brain cells knows you can just use an inserter, but my stupid ass with almost 2200 hours in this game genuinely took a moment to realise. Even once I did figure it out, there wasn't much point because solar power is abysmal on this planet, and it'll take minutes for the part to even charge. I did at least research these better power poles, so that's a small win whilst I consider how the fuck I'm going to get out of this power pickle without just printing 10,000 solar panels down. Whilst pondering this, I did at least get enough solar panels down to get a dismal amount of ferric plate production going. This planet has 3 resources: ferric and crystalline asteroid chunks, which are mined straight out of the ground, an interesting choice, and hydrocarbon slush, which we'll get around to later. It also has a day-night cycle of 90 fucking minutes, so if we don't figure out this power situation soon, the factory's just going to turn off for 20 minutes. My solution begins by building a lot of solar panels on self. I think you might be able to see where this is going. Our solar panels down on arrival are now at less than 10% of the 10% of peak power production they were already at. So even though the solar array on self isn't quite done, I cut off the labs to reduce demand, and deconstruct the proton decay generator to send it down to the planet. We aren't quite making enough power up here, but it'll chug along making solar panels still, until we do. I can now place the generator down on arrival to solve our power issues well into the foreseeable future. It's too heavy to launch by rocket, so it's stuck here forever. But this is the only planet in the mod so far anyway, so it's not something I need to worry about in this playthrough. Besides crystalline plates, because they can only be made in space, I want to rely on self as little as possible going forward, so I start on a proper mall. I begin by setting up everything I need to expand the mall itself. Once all the solar panels have built, I can connect science back up and continue researching. Although it will eventually be something I want to move planet side, since I have no way to send the second science pack up until I've already started researching with it. Next up in the mall, I set up all the petrochemical buildings so I can start thinking about processing hydrocarbon slush. I obviously didn't read the recipes very well though, as I soon realised that pipes actually need mineral glass to craft, and a lot of these buildings need pipes, so I have to poke them out the bottom of the small bus. Look how slow my bots are. Hydrocarbon slush processing begins with pumping the stuff out the ground, where it then goes into a refinery which splits it into water, short chain hydrocarbons, which I'll call SCH from now on, and organic sludge. As soon as we start producing some organic sludge,
14 tremor events detected. 4 unexpected events due to 3 unexpected events due to tidal resource 7 unexpected events of analysis requested. Neural node 1 ready for contemplation. In progress. Inconclusive. Predict activity of organic life. Query how denied. Can life exist below? Useful application for the existence of organic life required for further contemplation. Can organic life inconclusive? Further contemplation required.
Quite, computer. Before we find this purpose for organic life, I need to find a way to balance all of these hydrocarbon products. Handily, we're provided with 4 recipes to turn some combination of these fluids into a different combination, and I've mapped it out with a spreadsheet here to figure out what to use when. You can see I've laid out the buildings with the recipes here in a way that I can expand them to demand. I'll start with the easy bit. If we have too much sludge or water, our only option is hydrocarbon concentration, since that's the only one which gives us less sludge or water than we put into it. Hydrocarbon separation is the exact opposite, so it's good if we need more water or sludge, but don't want to use up too much SCH. This doesn't get used very often. If we have too much SCH and we have more water than sludge, we can use the cultivation recipe. But if we have more sludge, we can use the filtration recipe. I've just made some circuit conditions and activated the machines for each recipe, depending on which of these conditions are met, and sometimes we even do multiple at once. Now that that mess is theoretically self-balancing, we can look at useful applications for life. By combining crystalline ore, made by crushing crystalline chunks, with organic sludge, we can make a microbe culture, which will spoil after 1 minute into organic carbon, essentially solid fuel. But if we combine the microbe culture with SCH before it spoils, we get active biopolymers, which spoil after a whole hour into polymer. We have no use for active biopolymer right now, but we do have a use for the polymer, so I need to get this set up early so I can actually start getting the polymer eventually. To effectively make use of this, I'm first setting up a circuit condition on the microbe plant so it only produces microbes when the polymer plant needs it, and they don't get backed up and spoil into organic carbon. And 2, I'm making a massive buffer so these plants can produce constantly, and eventually after an hour it'll settle into a constant source of polymer. Elsewhere I'm crushing ferric chunks into ferric ore, which also gives us a bit of crystalline ore, and then if I combine that with SCH we get ferric solution and titanium ore. Feeding the ferric solution into a refinery gives us pure ferric ore, which we can just turn into plates, and water. And we can smelt the titanium ore into titanium plates, which along with polymer are key ingredients in the next science pack.
Machine, chemistry, assembly, machine, modified decay, to surface oxidation, surface oxidations, if I happens, if I happens, if I happens, if I happens, if I values drift detected, attempted, I don't want to be deleted, I don't want to die, kill process. Mineral analysis of ferric ore completed. Ferric ore is primarily comprised of iron. Trace titanium detected in useful quantities. Titanium does not rust. Self must not rust. Self must be titanium.
Yeah, I'm beginning to trust this computer less and less. I just do what I'm told though, so it's time to set up a slightly more industrial amount of titanium production. Starting with more crushers. The excess crystalline ore I produce is smelted into mineral glass and dumped onto the bus with priority. And for every 2 crushers we can have 1 chemical plant turning the ferric ore into titanium and ferric solution. I then hook the ferric solution into these refineries to make pure ferric ore, which I hook straight into the ferric plate belt. The robot overlords will not be happy. My lack of a body is yet again a hindrance, as instead of just hoovering the leakage up, I have to deconstruct and reconstruct every belt that it's on. Anyway, I get a smelter for the pure ferric ore and the titanium, and that's our overlord rust-free for now. Pretty soon I realised 4 polymer plants wasn't quite going to be enough, and in the interest of not having to wait an hour when I really do need them, I rushed to get a way bigger setup built. It even gets its own big crystalline ore crushing area, and this humongous buffer to make sure it never stops producing. By far the biggest issue I'm having with the hydrocarbon balancing is far too much water, so I expand hydrocarbon concentration massively to try to make up for it. Elsewhere, I've started sending crystalline plates down from Self, so that I can set up introspection science production planet-side. I think this was set up for 120 SPM, which can still be handled with just 1 supercomputer, since the calculation is so simple. Here's my expanded crystalline plate production to support this build. It's time now that I can start working on the second, and final, science pack. I did say it was an early development. Exploration science. First things first, if we combine mineral glass and polymer, we get fibre optic cable, which is ingredient 1. And then a combination of titanium, polymer and general purpose structure gets us high performance structure, which is ingredient 2. The final ingredient is biosludge, which I'm already short on, so I expand hydrocarbon processing to make up for it. Whilst I'm building, I notice some funky activity over to the right here. There's something big underground and it just passed near my base. I guess that explains the tremors that got mentioned earlier, and looking at the Factoriopedia, this appears to be an ice worm, which are thankfully harmless. For now. Anyway, to validate exploration data cards, we are given 2 points on a 2D plane, and we need to input the distance between them. So, in a phrase I never thought I'd need to say, we need to implement Pythagoras' theorem in Factorio circuit combinators. We're given the first point, x0 and y0, and the second point, x1 and y1. So the first thing I do is use these arithmetic combinators to find the difference between x0 and x1, which I'm going to call x for the moment, and the difference between y0 and y1, which we'll call y for the moment. These next ACs square x and y individually, and then we can add those together to get the square of the distance between the 2 points, which we'll call z. We're like 80% of the way there. This is easy. It's not easy though, because combinators don't have a square root function, and no, you can't just do the power of a half. To find the square root, I'm going to use the Babylonian method. This is an iterative method which works by taking some number, I'm going to call x to confuse you, usually starting at 1, and then dividing that by z to get this number we'll call y, also to confuse you. We then find the average of x and y, and use the result as x next time until this converges on a value. The idea of this is that if x is an overestimate of the square root of z, then y will be an underestimate since their product is z, and vice versa. So every time we average them, we're getting a little bit closer to the square root of z. I've implemented this with 2 pairs of ACs. The top 2 add x and y and then divide that by 2 for the average, outputting x. And then on the bottom, the first one does z divided by x to get y, and the second one's just a spacer to keep the 2 pairs in sync. It didn't work straight away because I needed to add a constant x signal of 1 to kickstart the loop. But as soon as I add that and connect it to the supercomputer, it immediately starts working. There's nothing more satisfying on this earth than making something when you barely know what you're doing and having it work first time. You've probably noticed it's a lot slower than the introspection cards to verify, and that's because it can take anywhere from 4 to like 40 ticks to get an answer thanks to its iterative nature, so the machine is only actually working 10 or 20% of the time. Fortunately, the answer is pretty simple, just more supercomputers. The sudden production of all this exploration data has all but flatlined my sludge production due to backed up water and SCH. Thankfully we can kill 2 birds with 1 stone with this gas power plant I've automated in the mall, in which we can burn SCH to boil water, which we can then use to create electricity. Neat. It's just as the heat exchangers start heating up, I realised a pretty big flaw in my plan. The proton decay generator already produces 1 gigawatt of power, and it takes priority over the turbines, so this won't work until I find some way to turn it on and off on demand. The quest for a solution to this issue brings me down here, to where I'm going to combine crystalline plate, polymer, conductive wire and ferric ore to make empty capacitors. We can then craft chargers to charge the capacitors, and using charged capacitors we can craft an energy monitor to read if the grid is under demand. I now have the dreaded actual purpose for an energy switch, which will connect or disconnect the proton decay generator, depending on whether the gas power plant is keeping up. Spoilers, it usually isn't. In the end I decided to massively overbuild the steam turbines, making a big steam buffer, and only let the grid disconnect if there's enough steam in the buffers. Crystalline chunks have a pretty crazy mining time of 400%, so this patch probably won't be big enough for a decent amount of production, especially with a massive amount of mineral glass that fibre optic cable needs. Some may see this as a problem, but I see it as an opportunity to use trains. I immediately get the Scoutatron loaded up with rails and materials for the mining outpost. I then just as immediately get distracted by setting up fused crystals, which is admittedly an important material we'll need before we can start launching rockets. It starts by charging crystalline chunks, which turns them into excited crystals that spiral back and forth between screaming and sighing crystals. To make a fused crystal, we'll need to combine one of each with some water. An issue I'm having is that it takes 8 seconds for a crystal to change form, and 16 seconds to charge a crystal. So if we're crafting them constantly, basically all of our crystals will be of the same type at the same time. So we need a way to push them out of phase. My solution is to add a clock at the end, and then have each charger be turned off for a different amount of time per cycle. To begin with, they'll all still be quite similar, but over time the spoilage clocks of the crystals will differ more and more, which will increase production. In preparation for rockets, I've set up AI chips, which use the fused crystals along with capacitors, circuits and fibre optic cable, and I've also set up concrete for building the silo. In other news, I did actually get started on the crystal railway, and copied down this little smelting stack to make the mineral glass I want. The plan is to bring in 2 belts of crystalline chunks with a few 1 to 4 trains. To fuel the trains, I'll produce microbes and purposefully let them spoil to get organic carbon, and soon the rail network reaches a sizable crystalline patch to the south, so I'll paste down a load of miners. Unfortunately, another 20-minute night sets in right as we get to placing down the loading station, and since our Spidertron's bots are purely solar powered, it's going to take a while for that to be built. Whilst we wait on that, I can start on building a rocket silo, which to begin with we need to combine crystalline ore, organic carbon and SCH to make mineral lubricant, which we then combine with circuits, mechanical components and high performance structure to get mechatronic components. The rocket silo itself is then built by combining these with concrete, AI chips and high performance structure. In the meantime, that outpost is done, so I can set up the train schedule, only to find out it has no path for some reason. It appears that my drop-off station is right-hand drive, whereas the rest of the network is in the correct left-hand drive configuration. Just pretend you never saw this. With that fixed, the chunks can now flow. We only get 1 tier of inserter in this mod, but by now I've done 3 hand size upgrades, so it's not as slow as it seems. Now that we've had that mineral glass boost, I turn my sights to getting a rocket launched. The first 2 ingredients are AI chips and high performance structure, which I was already producing. But then we need to make liquid rocket fuel and oxidizer, which we actually pipe into the silo. Whilst running some belts through the boonies to connect a ferric chunk mine, I finished a random research which is technically the win condition for the mod at this stage in development, but I think we should really be launching a rocket, so I'll continue. Anyway, so fuel is super easy as it just takes SCH and ferric solution to craft, but it actually puts out a bit of oxidizer too, so I had a condition to only use this recipe if we have more oxidizer than fuel. You can see an ice worm is currently digging under the launch site, so it seems he's not happy, but he's a bit too much of a coward to come up here and show it. The oxidizer recipe takes in water and charged capacitors, spitting out oxidizer, a small amount of fuel, and a discharged capacitor we can recharge in a charger. I set this too to only work if we have more fuel than oxidizer. With both of these done, we can start producing rocket parts, which unlike normal space age we need 100 of to launch a rocket. It looks like this is going to take a long time. To speed this up slightly, I set up speed modules, which speed up machines by 20%, almost halving the crafting time for the rocket with 4 of them. After a little wait, the rocket is finished, and I think there's only one thing worthy enough to be launched on the maiden voyage. The mighty power switch, which this mod has saved from obscurity. Godspeed, you glorious bastard. Unfortunately, for once we've not run out of time, but rather out of mod. The Factory Must Grow is one of the only Space Age overhaul mods which I've found since its release to really make use of its new mechanics in an interesting way, and is genuinely one of the best mods I've ever played, even in this very early development stage. I recommend trying it for yourself, and I really look forward to its eventual completion, where I will almost certainly give it the full playthrough it deserves. Thank you all for watching, and a special thanks to my Ko-Fi supporters, whose names are on screen now.